Okay, no, thank you very much for the opportunity to interview you. In that way. And I'm trying to look at educational transformation. Like, I'm sure you've read a bit of the abstract and what I'm trying to do. One key thing that comes in literature when it comes to Western education in Africa is the fact that it was meant to create an elitist group. And there's different contentions and arguments about what the elitism is all about. One thing I seek to understand is, the different notions of elitism and how people conceive elitism. So, first question to you be your understanding of elitism in higher education in Ghana.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Elitism, basically, to think about it in that way, I think about it like people who are separating themselves from others in order to raise themselves higher than others. There's a concept in Chi called Amuzu, which is basically taking your body and lifting it up, and it's also the word for arrogance. I would see also my own supervisor, he was a former Pro Vice Chancellor here. In his inaugural lecture, he gave a talk entitled Of Cocoa, Cassava, and Chocolate. And in it, he was basically saying that he was drawing an extended analogy, basically a conceptual framework that, cocoa, it takes up all this land space, in order to eventually produce chocolate. But he was saying cassava is, something of our own. He was saying that basically in our academic pursuits, instead of doing things that sustain ourselves, we're basically following the mandate of the so-called West in order to, clear our land ultimately for their benefit. So I think that this is basically the elitism that the people are in place kind of like to be basically like indirect colonialism, where these people serve as intermediaries for ideological strands that don't find their roots in here and aren't for our best interests. So basically I see them similar to like how indigenous rulers were under the British system, basically like on how a plantation system in the West during enslavement to function like overseers, and also see them as they had this concept of meritorious manumission, which is that if you sell out your other black people, then they would give you your freedom or give you other perks and things of that nature. And I think that this is kind of what we have going on, here, as opposed to serving their own people and their own interests. They're doing the bidding of their historical, current, and future enemies. So I think elitism is on par with being an overseer, being an indirect, colonialist ruler.
Thank you very much. So to what extent would you say higher education is elitist? The system in itself, to what extent would you say it's elitist?
Yeah, I would say very much so. I rarely find people doing work that's, again, driven by our own theoretical frameworks, driven by our own conceptual frameworks, in our own languages and things of that nature. So again, looking at these as kind of like people who are put in places to serve outside interests, and when I say outside, I mean Eurasian interests specifically. I definitely think that that's the overwhelming trend. Recently, I went to the African Studies Association of Africa in Ibadan, and in there, everyone was like, yes, we need to use our own theories, we need to use our own concepts and blah, blah. But no one was doing it. They were like exhorting everyone else to do it. It was like, well, just do it. Why are you still saying in this day and time we should use our own, just use your own theory? And, I think that was something that I was disappointed in, but not necessarily surprised about. So, I think it's really misoriented and disoriented. And I think it's part of the miseducation and diseducation. Like even at that same conference, someone was talking about the history of medicine and science, and they were talking about the Greeks. And I was like, my goodness. The Greeks worship Imhotep. What are you talking about? So, I think there's a long way to go, and I think a major issue is miseducation, not giving people the right information, and then diseducation, which is not giving people any information, especially about themselves as Africa and African people.
And those things are done basically to like the concept of Ahoma Soda is to portray themselves to the masses as being different. So they try to use those things. Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing that is lacking within the higher education setup in Africa generally is the fact that the community service-oriented values are not inculcated into the systems of education. How can that be changed? How can we introduce community service-oriented values into the higher education setup in Ghana?
Yeah, I think that it's a question of orientation, goals, aims, objectives, all of these things. Because if you have a so-called educational system that is set up to serve your Eurasian enemies, it's very difficult to do something that's going to help African people out of that. So the whole reason why these schools were put in place, initially was to do just that. So when they're talking about classics, they're talking about Greek, Rome, whatever. And it's really not. I think that the main function of higher education should be knowledge of self, knowledge of enemy, and then the behavioral correlate that goes together with that knowledge, and that will come back to your community service. So if you have knowledge of self, if you have knowledge of enemy, it tells you what you should do to protect yourself from that enemy. It tells you what types of strategies you should do in order to protect yourself, look out for yourself, feed yourself, clothe yourself. Recently, I was talking to Prof. Akosia Adamako Ampofo, who was the former director here, and she just asked me, what do you think should happen at Legon? How do you think it could be made better? So I just gave her a whole list of stuff, and eventually she was like, well, I guess I have. But I was saying that everything that we should do, that basically Legon, this is again, to give like a microcosm of higher education in general. I was saying that I think that Legon should be a model. Actually, I think African studies within Legon and then Legon as a whole should be a model of self-sufficiency in the sense of what are you doing your, scholarship for? When we have open gutters right here on campus, when we have doomsaw every day, that we should be doing research into how to do solar cells. All of these, roofs should be replaced with solar panels. That's it. I was talking with another colleague here, and he was saying whenever it's rainy season, all the water just drains off and goes off somewhere. I'm like, why aren't we harvesting that water? All of these things, I was saying that all this fallow land that we have here, that could be a farm. At a place, I was at University of Wisconsin-Madison, that's where I did my master's. They had all this land for gardening. So all the grad students or whatever, they would just have their own plots and do gardening. I had so many tomatoes, I would have buckets. So basically, I think that it should be a tool for self-sufficiency, sovereignty, and to lead the way. And to show how to do that, I was reading an article about the difference between Singapore and Ghana. They have those stories that are always compared. And it was saying that the leader of Singapore, when he came here, he met the vice chancellor under Kwame Nkrumah, and the vice chancellor studied classics, again, your Greek and your Latin. And he was like, these guys are not serious. You're not. There's nothing in there that is, one, even knowledge of self or anything, much less this is how you stand on your own 2 feet. So I think it needs to be a combination of these two things. If you look at the debate between W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, it was basically an idea of, do we need scholars in the sense of pure scholars to get these big PhDs? Do we need more vocational training so that we can depend on ourselves? If we need to build a house, we know how to build it. If we need to wear shoes, we need to make our own shoes. And I think that basically what higher education would need here is a combination of those two. So our scholarship is going towards, this is how, to be self-sufficient. Our self-sufficiency is going towards, this is how to support our scholars and our researchers.
Okay, so the combination of what?
I think it's a combination, and that will once we do it here in terms of community service, now it's one thing to say you all do that, and we've never done it ourselves. Who's going to listen to these egghead academics who don't know how to even grow anything, right, or build their own houses or whatever? But if we can say, look at what Legon has done, this is the model of self-sufficiency, that puts us in a better position to go in and do community service. And one of my colleagues, another one of my colleagues was also saying that sometimes they work with traditional rulers, and they're coming to the traditional rulers saying, oh, give us information. But the traditional rulers are like, y'all are African studies, y'all should be giving us information. All we know is our village, and then we know about what the West is doing. You know, we know about Queen of England. That's all we know. They're like, if we want to know, as a matter of fact, I have another colleague who's working on traditional architecture, right? And in her research, you know, she said that the people were moving away from their, this is Tamale, moving away from their round earth houses to go towards these sandcrete blocks with aluminum sheets and whatever. So when she gave her seminar presentation, I was asking, what's the role of the researcher in cross-pollination of African ideas? So these people in Tamale, they know what they've been doing for however long, and they know what the Europeans have been doing, but they may not know anything about Great Zimbabwe in terms of building in stone. Even though they may have stones on their land, they're just looking at, you know, they may not know about other places, you know, in Sulezu or wherever where they're using wood. So, and it's right, it may be right there, but they're not, you know, familiar with these types of ideas, much less going into the rest of the African world, seeing uses of bamboo, seeing uses of, you know, whatever it is, rammed earth. And I think that if we can, you know, with what we know, and assuming we know anything more, if we have this broad spectrum of knowledge, then we can provide that knowledge. And because at the end of her interview, everybody was saying, yes, we just want to do sandcrete houses, you know, with blocks or whatever. That's because that's all they know. But if they know about more things from other places in Africa, then they can say, And my answers are going along. I know you're transcribing, so. So you can pick out whatever is relevant.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I need all the information. Yeah. So the thing is, how is the university going to do it? How does it? How then does the university relate to society? Because the concept of the ivory tower is still with the universities. I mean, communities have grown and it's become a part of the town. But there's still that thing to cut society off. How does the university, you know, demystify itself and then relate to society in order to say collaborate with you know, the activities going on in society? How?
Yeah, I think that becoming relevant to itself will also make it relevant to the rest of society. So like another suggestion I gave to Prof. Adamako Ampofo was, you know, if we are able to use this land productively, then we can have a farmer's market where people are coming to say, oh, you know, that's what the university is doing for the community. If we're able to produce our own solar cells, and then we can make those, you know, cost efficient, and even if it's something small, you can charge your phone using this small panel. Now you're relevant not only to yourself in terms of being able to be self-sufficient, but you can help other people do that as well, as opposed to import more petrol and all these types of things that aren't sustainable. And I told her that it would be a very good idea if she linked it to this Paris protocol about, you know, global warming and stopping that. That if we're doing all these things, these are quote unquote green things. These are sexy in the, you know, academic circles. So if we can do those types of things, I think the demystification is actually becoming relevant. As opposed to what we're doing now, which is serving our Eurasian enemies. We just go to the villages, we mine for data, and then we give it to them to prove their theory is right or wrong. But it's like, is that what we're doing? So again, it's coming back to, are we doing cocoa research? Are we doing cassava research? Or are we doing chocolate research? You see what I'm saying? If we're doing cassava, then we're talking about we're feeding our own people. We're using our land productively to feed our own people and to solve our own problems. And to come directly to your question, I think that leadership could make a major impact in that. So if we have a vice chancellor who is of that mindset, then you would actually see those things, you know, take place from the ground up. You know, that's what I consider myself attempting to do from my small little sphere of influence. But I think it could be a much wider sphere if you have someone else who's of a higher position interested in implementing such things.
Anyway, thanks. Another issue is the fact that university education takes the African in us out and then tries to make us something else, anything but an African. How can the pride in African self be brought back apart from doing a 1 credit course in African studies? I mean, what can we do to put the pride in African self back in the higher education setup?
This is a good question, and one thing that I find is that oftentimes people, continental Africans, we're talking about here on the African continent, continental Africans don't really start to become African until they go abroad. Because before that, they think that they're Ewe, they think they're Fanti, they think, even in smaller than that, they'll say, okay, I'm Anlo and y'all are this or whatever. But once they go abroad, they may get arrested because they're black. No one's asking, what's your ethnic, whatever. They don't even know what Ghana is. They're like, what is, and like I remember reading an article by Haile Garima, who did the movie Sankofa. And in it, he was talking about he always saw himself as Ethiopian and better than everybody else who's black until he went to the U.S. And I think he got his head cracked open by a police officer, and then he realized we're all in this together. These are how the global battle lines are drawn. I think that one thing would be making it, Kwame Nkrumah, all this first generation, they went abroad in order to see that broader picture, and then they saw we're all in this together, we're all Africans. I think that it would be ideal to gear education more towards creating Africans, getting people to see beyond what their fragmentary identities are to a global African identity. And I think that can be done, again, through knowledge of self, knowledge of enemy, and then behavioral correlates to that knowledge. If you know this, what are you supposed to do about that? What are you supposed to wear? What are you supposed to eat? What are you supposed to do in all those various areas?
But how easy is that going to be? Because when Kwame Nkrumah put together African studies, thinking behind African studies was to have an African basis for physiology, for psychology, for every course in the university. But you read as well and you see Kwame Nkrumah faced a lot of opposition from the university. So there are people who are still in love and are seduced by the Western constructs and then the Western ways of doing stuff. So it has to be done, but it's still difficult because there are people who do not think it's the right way to go. So there's always that tension and contradictions. And
this is true. Like, I teach Intro to African Studies, which is a required course, a 200 level course. And after, when we first get into class, I'll ask them, what do you think of when you think of Africa? Poverty, corruption, everything you can think of that's bad. Warlords, war, something, famine. And then I say, I'm surprised you all didn't mention writing, because we invented writing. And then I'll give them examples. I'll actually write in Medu Neutral on the board, and they're like, oh, wow. And I'm like, I'm surprised you didn't mention mathematics. And then I'll give them examples of, mathematics. I'm surprised you didn't mention science. I'll give them all of these different things, and I'll give them actual human being personalities who did this, who did this. So by the time we're in, it's just 3 weeks, the history of the longest people on the face of the planet was cramming in. But by the time we're in even the first week, they're like, how come we didn't learn this from kindergarten? And I think that's powerful because those are going to be the people who are going to be making decisions. The ones who are making decisions now are doing so because they don't know anything, right? And we already know what that leads us. It leads us to Doomsaw, it leads us to Bad Rose, to the floods here at Circle. We know that it's basically if you know what not knowing anything will get you, at least knowing something can't get you anything worse than what you are in now. So I think that that's kind of where, at least from where I am, again, if my sphere of influence is bigger, then I would do bigger things. But just from the students who I'm able to touch and reach, a lot of them, come by my office asking for books, and and I'm like, if we can get that person who's sensible to be president, MP, whatever, DCE, I don't care. If we can get anyone with sense in any of those positions, then you would see a change, because that's what Kwame Nkrumah was. He went abroad, he met people like John Henrik Clark, Schomburg, all these folks. And just because he came back with some level of sense, that's You see what I'm saying? That's just one person with some sense. Imagine if you can get other people, with some sense. So from my perspective and what I'm able to do, I would say that's knowledge of self. We also tell them, because they have this view that Europeans brought civilization. Like, posing the question of civilization or barbarism, I'll give them examples of Leopold in Belgium, of von Trotha in Namibia, the first Holocaust. These are things they never heard about Tasmania, Truganini, the very last one who was there, that's around your neighborhood. I'll give them all these examples, the Arawaks, everything. And it makes them to start questioning, how are they going to bring civilization when they haven't become civilized yet? How are they going to bring writing when the British have never developed a writing system to date? The French have never developed a writing system to date, but we had writing systems all over the continent. So, again, once you have knowledge of self, there's a quote that I always cite by Runoko Rashidi, where he says, what we do for ourselves depends on what we know of ourselves. What we know of ourselves depends on what we think of ourselves, and what we think of ourselves depends on what we have been told. So if you see the inaction or inappropriate action, you can trace that as a logical consequence of not being told anything about yourself, not thinking good about yourself. I've had so many people say, "Oh, black people can only do bad. Only white people can do," and I would just I would like to slap you, but I'd really like to slap the one who told you this, who's somewhere in Britain, right? So again, if you haven't been told anything, then you think ill of yourself. You don't know anything about yourself. So now it's almost like a science experiment of what if you had people who knew nothing about who they are? What would happen? Ghana.
Well, that's a good one. That will lead me to ask, there's a sense of privilege that comes with higher education. And even if we argue that sense of privilege is reducing by the years, there's still a sense of privilege, But
internally or externally, in the sense of how people perceive it,
how
or
people
both?
perceive it, and then and as well to the individual who gets higher education, at least it becomes a springboard to get into the job market, you get a job, and it's a privilege to serve in whatever job you find yourself. But we're unable to find that sense of privilege. We're unable to translate it into a sense of responsibility. And like you said, if in a small class, if you influence those students and they're able to think in the right way, they come back and then they serve the society and they know they have to do it for the society. But now we're taught to more like you are acquiring education for yourself. So you're getting educated, but it's for you. So the privilege comes for you. So when you're able to get into society, that sense of privilege is difficult to translate into a sense of responsibility. How can we change that?
This is a good question. I think, coming from the perspective of African studies, one thing that I see is that you have, how do I even put it? I'll put it bluntly, something like intellectual incest. We have people who only have this very small pool of ideas, a very small worldview. They're all going to the same churches. They're all doing the same this. They're all doing the same that, whatever. I think that even from the perspective of African studies, what I would like to see and what I've mentioned is to have Africans with a level of consciousness from all over the world. Africans from Brazil with a, African mindset and worldview. Africans from Britain, from the U.S., from Australia, the indigenous people there, the black people of Melanesia, get a scholar from there. That's when you actually would have African studies, is that you have all these various ideas coming to the table. Now, I mentioned that to Prof. Adumako Ampofo, and she was like, one of the challenges to that is the nuts and bolts of it, in terms of how do you woo somebody to come with the salary. Like, my salary now is less than my stipend as a master's student, right? But I think that those are, when you have people who even in the face of that will come, those are the people who have principles and who are serious, right? So I'm here, and I have no plans on ever setting foot on U.S. soil again. That's why I don't even go to the embassy. Now, if you have somebody who has that level of commitment and determination, whatever, here, they're coming with an entirely different, perspective and a perspective in terms of their responsibility towards the African continent. And I'll bring that up because recently, I want to say a couple months ago, the Dominican Republic said that they were expelling all Haitians because those are black people and they're not black, quote unquote. And it brought up this thing that was said by Kwame Nkrumah, and really the impetus for it was coming from Marcus Garvey, but basically until Africa is a world power, no African anywhere on the face of the planet will be respected. Another colleague who's in Germany was telling me about this brother who was in police custody, bound and shackled, and they set him alight and then said he did it to himself.
Wow.
Hands bound, feet bound. They said somehow he got the ladder out, doused himself in it, and then after dousing himself with the ladder fluid, still was able to, with his teeth and tongue, I suppose. But basically, and when you look at the states, it's open season. They're killing everybody, and it's just like target practice. So, again, the responsibility comes from having that broader worldview and seeing the battle lines on a much broader stage than, say, NDC versus MPP or Akans versus everybody else or whatever, the view is that's here. I think here, oftentimes, people have the view of coming to the university is the most European thing that they can do. I'm not from the village. I don't wear clothes like the village. Don't mistake me for a villager, blah, blah, blah. And, that's the direction that they're going in. On the prologue to 2000 Seasons by Aikwe Omar, he gives us very vividly in terms of people rushing towards these multitudes and throngs rushing towards the whiteness of destruction, and he puts it like this shiny, glittering city of shiny white trash, right? Versus those who have already tasted that death and destruction there and are looking for a way back to their way. So here you have the millions, if not billions, who are thronging towards us. Then you have the few who are trying to get out of it. Like, you see what I'm saying? So I think that if you can have a contingent of these types of Africans who already have some level of sense, not only saying that can come from the diaspora, but also continental Africans with sense. I'd like to see Africans from Zimbabwe, from South Africa, from Senegal, like a Sheikh Anta Diop type of person. Bring all that to bear. That's how you can change it, because you have more than, they have a saying, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have anything that you're working with, how are you going to produce, beautiful flowers from that?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, mentioning Sheikh Anta Diop, I never heard of Sheikh Anta Diop, even not after my first degree. It was after doing my masters, and I started asking questions, started doing research out of the classroom, out of the school. So I started, reading about Sheikh Anta Diop.
This is what my father said: never let school get in the way of your education. That's what my father used to always say.
And it's sad how you go to school and you don't even get to know those people. African people and stuff. And I was listening to Van Setma once, and he said it was even difficult to get certain literature into certain spaces in Africa. People make sure there's certain literature that's not coming, certain books that's coming. Then I understood that, so I'm like, okay, so that's why some people are funding schooling in Africa, because once they're funding, then they determine the kind of things you're reading, the kind of things that are coming in.
One who pays the piper calls it too.
And it brought everything into perspective. So it's a never-ending, scheme. But you don't even know where to start on time and stuff.
Well, one thing, at least at this level, or at least at the Institute of African Studies, is that there's a lot of sharing, mostly among the students. I don't know about the faculty, but they come to me to get like hundreds of ebooks. There's a site called Library Genesis that has full text PDFs of books, all types of things. So, like, for example, if you type in Egypt or Egyptian, you'll find like Egyptian grammar by Gardner, like all of the main texts there. You would never be able to get a lot of those texts here, but if you search for so much now, you can just get that online. But to get to that point, you have to even have a will and a desire to go beyond, like how you said, what you may get for your first degree. So
how can higher education relate to to society, apart from everything we said, how can we relate to the ordinary person, the ways of higher education? Because education should be culture, should be society, should reflect society should reflect education. I always tell people, we complain about Ghana, but Ghana is only a reflection of our universities. Because the leaders of the country are producing our universities, and the things that go on in the University of Ghana reflects in what goes on in national politics. Some academics are difficult to accept, and they find it difficult to accept, but for me, I always say that if we're able to change the university, society will change. If the university remains the way it is, the country will be whatever it is. So even though there's no collaboration between the university and the society, whatever goes on in the university reflects in society. But somehow people don't want to accept the fact. But in any case, how can we change, even though there's no collaboration between the university, yet there's that reflection in society? How can we collaborate with the ordinary person, as universities, to be relevant to them, to advance the cause of the society, to share, empathize with the situation, because no matter what, we're privileged, and if you have that consciousness in you, and you have to do it for the masses and not for yourself, then you empathize and understand this. Because Ghana, my argument as well is that education has become a thing that bridges, people in society, bridges different groups of people. So it's only black people you see who say, "Oh, you're educated." This person is not educated. And I always ask, what do you mean by you're educated? That person is not educated. The fact that you've been to school, so what is the education? And you find the power relations. People get, a lot of power from that. I've been to school, you haven't been to school, and that alone makes other people call into their shelves. Then they're able to exploit them. How can we, rethink what we call education? Because for me, one of my theoretical arguments is the fact that our conceptualization of education in itself is problematic. What we call education it's problematic. It's not education, but that is what we call education. So because of that, there's a disjoint between the school and the society. There's no collaboration. And every time academia is complaining, there's no link between academia and industry, blah, blah, blah. We don't share in the problems of the masses. And it reflects in everything we do. You see the power relations in the university, the same thing that goes on. How can we change? I mean, you mentioned, starting from the small unit of the classroom and, going up and down with bigger leadership roles. But how can that consciousness be raised? How can we do it? For me, I find one thing as well. I find it interesting that as Africans, we have institute, or public women's dream wasn't to have African studies as an institute for a long time. It's interesting how Africans have African studies. No European university has a department or an institute for European studies. But we have African. Why should we be having African? We should be having European departments of European studies. But then we have African institutes of African studies in many universities. And that in itself is problematic, but people don't really see that. So there's always that disjoint between us, the educated ones, in quotes, quote and unquote, and then the so-called uneducated ones. Through what means can we raise the consciousness both of the academics, because most of them are ignorant anyway, and then the masses as well, in order to have that link with, or reflection, or whatever it is, with society.
Yeah, this is a good question, and several different questions. And I wish I was taking notes, because as you were saying points, things will come to me. I want to answer. One thing that I have a national service person, and when we first started speaking, I asked her, because of her name, I said, "What did you know?" I'm a teacher. Pa. I said, I'm Pa. I said, I'm a teacher. Pa. Now I did on the brofufra, and then she started to put English in it, and I was asking her, "Well, do you know the word for this?" Oh, it's this. And I was. So I just handed her one of my dictionaries. I got like all these dictionaries, tree dictionaries. So I handed it to her, and then
showed her this is the word that you're looking for, she had never heard of. She said, I didn't know that there were any tree dictionaries, right? And I was thinking about this. It's not a unique thing. I'm just using that to whatever. I don't think I've met but a handful of people in the linguistics department who've ever read a dictionary in tree or whatever. And I think about that as a native speaker of English, that even though you're born in a place where English is the official language, blah, 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 they have English class, they have English department, they have, they'll call it history, but all it is English history, these types of things. So this is coming back to your point about African studies, that even in places where the people we're English, we know the English language, whatever, they're always studying English. If you go to France, they're always studying French, they're studying Napoleon, they're studying, all this stuff. And I think that this is the major difference. Even though we have so-called institutes of African studies, most of the time, like the outgoing Kwame Nkrumah chair, Professor Gordon, he said that what this actually boils down to in actual fact is village studies, where people are talking about this goes on in my village, that goes on in my village, and that's, the extent of it. There's not a cross-pollination of ideas that we were referring to before. Like, people don't even know about, when I say, I speak Wolof, they're like, what is that? They eat jollof rice, which comes from there, but they've never even heard of the language of the people who invented it. So there's not an idea, we think that being African is what we already are, as opposed to an ideal that should be strived to, which is to know more about all over the global African world, which requires a lot more effort than, this is just what we did in my village and that's what I grew up with. So I know that. I call it the forward-backwards paradigm. I know forwards towards Britain and America. I know backwards towards my village. That's it. It's like a horse with blinders on that can only see in front, and then it can look between its legs, and that's it. It can't do anything besides that. And I think this is a major issue in terms of, you see, he comes to make noise. In terms of coming back to this idea, first there has to be education, and that doesn't exist here. There's a good book called Too Much Schooling, Too Little Education, and that's exactly what we have here. We have schooling, but there hasn't been an educational system set up yet, right? That's what we're driving towards. So I think that there has to be an educational system. Professor Asa Hilliard, the late Professor Asa Hilliard, used to talk about education, looking at the root of it, and Dusseret talking about to pull out what's already in, a person and help a person to achieve their highest potential. He also talked about the Kemetic concept of mi-re, which is to become like the sun, that a person is always supposed to be striving towards perfection. So even if we look at African concepts of the human being, to say this person is a human being, as I said, this is the ideal. You see, whereas a European concept is that I make mistakes, I'm fallible, and blah, blah, blah. I have original sin, or evil, all of those alienation types of terms. So I think that, first off, there has to be a concerted attempt to create an educational system, because there isn't one here yet. There's a system of schooling. And I think that has to be something that I don't know if it will be brought in, or if it's something that could be endogenous. I think that if you get people apprised of what the actual situation is, that there isn't education yet, then they can start saying, well, how do we do it? How do we, start something like that? Now, to come back to the linkage with society, I think that, this is what I was telling you before, that if we can actually become relevant to ourselves, then we can become relevant to the rest of society. I often talk to people about the government, like when Muhammad took these vacations to Dubai, they were like, how come he's not doing his vacation and his holidays here in Ghana? But like you said, how the educational system is a reflection of society, I was like, the government is just a reflection of society. These are people who have no knowledge of self and no knowledge of enemy, right? In terms of all Eurasians, why are you giving your money to Eurasians if you know this is your enemy, right? He's doing what all of you all would do if you were in that position, if you had the money to do it. And I think this is where we come back to the idea of behavioral correlate. Once you know this, what is the behavior supposed to logically follow behind this knowledge, right? This is, I think, where we have to really get to. If you have somebody who now knows that these are my enemies and this is myself and I need to support myself so that we can defeat our enemies, you won't be seeing people travel to Dubai, right? But if you have people who have, just absolutely, they don't know anything, he's doing what all of you would do. And I was talking to another colleague who, like, she's very much into socialism, blah, blah, blah. So she will talk about the IMF and World Bank and how, African governments are blah, blah, blah and need to get off of it. And then next thing I know, she's turning around getting a loan, not from an African bank, from a white Afrikaner South African bank. Yeah. I was like, wow, look at the dissonance here, right? Between, I know that this is bad for the country, but this is okay for me, and I have all these justifications for why it's okay for me, right? There has to be what my father calls getting your different selves together, which is that if you're African, that needs to be African in the area of psychology, in the area of health, in the area of, spirituality, in every single area, right? As opposed to what it is now. I'm part of this political organization, so I'm straight. Yeah. It's basically like a Christian phenomenon. Like, I'm saved. Yeah. Everybody else, you need to come get saved, like me. And what it really does is just the same thing, I hold my soul, versus everybody else. But I think if we're actually working towards, again, coming back to goals, if we're working towards African liberation, then you start seeing, well, what do I need to do on a personal level to, bring that to pass? And then once you are doing it in your own life, now if you become president, you just do that on a grander scale, right? So like I'm saying, if I have the little bit of sense I know, if I've read all these books, my behavior should be different from someone who hasn't read any books, right? So if I know all this and I'm on the same Facebook that you're on, and I'm just chatting and playing whatever the thing is and liking this stupid thing and whatever, what's the point, right? But if I know this, then my behavior in some way, shape, or form should be different, right? And I think that this is what we really have to go to, that one, knowledge of self, knowledge of enemy. Now we have to get to the behavioral correlates. What are you supposed to do once you know that? And then once you are able to, this is the thing, like in Blueprint for Black Power by Amos Wilson, he talks about the different levels of power. He talks about, brute force, coercion, influence, manipulation. And basically these are the different levels of power that are used by our enemies, the Eurasians. It's like the most effective one is manipulation, because they get you to do things without you knowing that they're getting you to do that. Even there doesn't have to be a British person in the room and we're speaking English, because it's been embedded in us already, right? So now if we're talking about, okay, well, how do we get out from under that white world terror domination? Well, there are actually a couple of points to that. A lot of people like to talk about different systems that aren't beneficial for us. So whether it's religion, look at what Christianity is doing, whether it's capitalism, whether it's, whatever it is, we'll look at these and say, that's the problem. And there was a quote by Dr. Khalid Muhammad where he said that's doing that type of thing is the equivalent of saying the problem is the spider web and not the spider, right? You have your enemy, the spider, with venom and whatever, and you're saying, okay, let's move the spider away. Now let's get rid of the spider web. All right, now we're good. The spider is going to come and do another web. It spun this one in the area of religion. It spun this one in the area of economics. It spun this one in the area of psychology, right? So I think this comes back to the part of knowledge of enemy. First you have to say, and no one says this, and that's why we're exactly where we are. We're basically like 1471 Africans. That's like before the Portuguese came, and we don't know anything about them. We're still in that exact same point that we don't know anything about them. Are they our friends? We don't know. Maybe. And the point of history is so that you can see patterns and see every single time we tried that, this was the result. So let's try something different, right? So, again, the society will be better when the individuals in the society are better. If I'm sensible, you're sensible, she's sensible, everybody's sensible, you have a sensible society. But if I'm stupid, you're stupid, they're stupid, everybody has been not naturally stupid, but we've been stupefied, right? Look around, look to your left and right. This is what we're living with right now, right? So I think, again, knowledge of self, knowledge of enemy, and then behavioral correlates to try to be consistent with that newfound knowledge. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. This what I think about is, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. And anytime I think about these things, those are the things that come to me. There's a lot of work to be done. How are we going to do it? How are we going to raise the consciousness? How are we going to do it? That's the main thing I keep asking myself.
And even to come back to the raising consciousness, that brings up and the role of behavior in that as well. Because, initially, like during enslavement, African people weren't given Christianity because it was said that, okay, if they become Christian, you have to free them. Then this guy, Charles Colcott Jones, said, you know what? We can keep them physically in bondage, but we say we freed them spiritually, right? So that was like their caveat to do that. So once you got that, now you have people who are free in the mind or free in the spirit, whatever, even though they're still physically shackled. I think that this is basically, I think that this is basically what we're talking about sometimes when we talk about consciousness, which is where we're talking about, we know all of this now. I can name off the Aberdose King list. I know all of them. I know about this, I know about that, and now there's consciousness, but there isn't the behavioral correlate, there's not the consistency. So I know all of this stuff, but I'm wearing the same thing as this guy who hasn't read any of this stuff. I know all this stuff, but I'm driving the same kind of car, I'm using the same kind of phone, I'm doing all this stuff. I got the same sandcrete house as everybody else. That it has to go at least at some point in time, and usually I find people who are in the first quote-unquote generation of consciousness who are like, I have this concept, consciousness as accomplishment. Like, I got out of the church, give me a standing ovation, I'm done. As opposed to, all right, once we have the consciousness, all right, well, what are the behaviors that go along with that? What am I doing that's different from what I was doing before? If I do the complete opposite of everybody who doesn't have this consciousness, I can't be but so far, in the wrong.
Is it also not the case that the madness is highly rewarded?
Exactly.
Being on the appropriate path doesn't come with enough reward.
Exactly.
So we're able to get a lot more people to go into the madness.
Right. This is what they used to do, and one of the tropes that they used to use after enslavement, really during Reconstruction, but even before and after that, where they had this idea of the wretched freeman and the contented slave. And it's very similar to, it's actually, I want to write a paper on this at some point in time. It's like artificial selection as opposed to natural selection. And artificial selection in the sense of, like, if you're breeding sheep or whatever, you decide that these ones are not aggressive, these ones get fat, and those are the ones who I'm going to allow to breed, right? Whereas those ones, I'm going to either kill them off myself or let them die out or whatever. And this is basically what Africans are under the system of white world terror domination, under Eurasian hegemony, is that we're not the ones who make the decisions of who is going to be. It's like on the plantation, the strongest one, the one who is more trying to fight for freedom, that's the one who they make an example out of in front of everybody else. So now everybody else knows, okay, it's time to get in line. And then they reward the one who is, completely against being African. We're having a rebellion, you go and form meritorious manumission, will give you your freedom. So basically, it's a process, as long as we're out of power, it's a process of them selecting who is going to be rewarded for insanity and who is going to be punished for sanity. And what that it's almost at the genetic cellular level that everybody who has sense, we're killing those off as much as possible, whether it's Kwame Nkrumah, whether it's Thomas Sankara, whether it's Patrice Lumumba. And now everyone who comes after, there's a proverb in Yoruba, Enito jinsi koto, kora yoku logba, that someone who falls into a pit teaches everyone else wisdom, right? So now everybody's like, let's avoid that. You see what I'm saying? So that's intentional. It's a system of rewards and punishments that are intentional. So as long as I can keep you wretched, and now you're the example of someone who, the wretched free man, and as long as I have the ability to make these the contented slaves. Let's look at Haiti. They got free, but first you have to pay reparations to France for however many gajillion years, for however many gajillion dollars, or francs or whatever. And now, you know, we have you under embargoes. We remove your democratically. Like, Europeans have a very long memory, and they hold grudges. Like, we can't allow a single look at Asada Shakur, right, from the Black Liberation Army. She's been in Cuba. They have $1 million bounty on her head. I think they raised it even higher than that. And they're like, we can't let a single example of African success, you know, ride. We have to make sure that no African goes unpunished, right? And this is basically what we're dealing with, coming back to your point about the rewards, the benefits, and the punishments. So at some point, there has to be a way to see through all of that. That in Sankofa, the movie I referenced earlier, the Muda Baruka, who I actually met here like a month or two ago, he said, snake going to eat whatever in the belly of the frog, right? So you can wait on the frog to give you whatever flies. Or you can see through all those rewards and punishments of like, you know what? If we take this entire thing, then all of it's ours. We don't need to whatever. And this also comes to the point of like when people talk about corruption as a problem in Africa. Let's picture this entire table. You have a feast and all of these Eurasians are here at the Berlin Conference eating it, right? Now our problem with each other is, look, a crumb came off and the person who is higher got more of the crumb than I did. That's corruption. They're talking about hundreds of thousands or even millions. You're not talking about the trillions upon trillions that are on the table. Y'all are fighting over these little scraps without realizing, you know what? If we come up on the table and take everything, you know, then this is ours. And I think that it's really a lack of vision of being able to see the bigger picture. And this is really what I've always seen, like being in Ghana and places like this, is that it's kind of like a high school in the sense of when you're in high school, you think the buck stops with the headmaster or the principal. You don't see the school board. You don't see the Ministry of Education. You just like, oh, the principal's so mean. He's getting me to do the test. That's how people see Ghana. Like even Kwame Nkrumah, when they deposed him, the CIA took credit for, you know, blowing out the cocoa price, you know, dropping the economy. And now people are saying, we're going to get you, Kwame Nkrumah. And then they said, we did that. They took credit for that. We did that. And you thought you did it yourselves, but we manipulated all of that. So until you can see the broader picture, then you still think that the buck stops with the president. You think Mahama is behind the doomsaw. Remember, doomsaw or Ya Mahama, as opposed to Ya privatization. They're going to sell that. You know, same thing Vodafone, same thing STC, and everything else that all of this is planned.
It's interesting, the view on corruption. I always say that we fight corruption at the wrong level. Our resources are being taken and we're given 5%. Someone takes 10% of 5% and you're fighting. The one who takes the 95%, you allow him to take it away. And you don't see that as corruption. You know? And
even one of my colleagues here, like this, I have a phone by RLG. I have a colleague who's like, I will never use an RLG phone because they did corruption. They had the SATA and the JITA and the this and the that. And they have a Korean phone. I was like, you know these Koreans, what they do in the black community in the U.S.? They'll shoot you in the back of the head for like a piece of gum that they thought you took. You know, what they do with the hair industry and all this other stuff. So you have a vendetta against someone who looks exactly like you, even though this place is going to employ your children, employ your cousins, and blah, blah, blah. They're here. So you can't see past, and I think this is the problem that we have now is a problem that we had back during enslavement, you know, colonialism, is that no knowledge of self, no knowledge of enemy. We don't realize that this person who calls himself another ethnic group is me, and that if we can come together, we can deal with this, you know, enemy. I did a talk in Ibadan on the ancient African origins of Pan-Africanism, basically talking about Kemet, meaning land of the black people, right? When we say land of the black people,
it's so profound because they never let the Eurasians come in until very, very late, on, that they realize we all have a common ancestry, a common descent, and therefore we share common goals, common interests, right? That's Kemet. Now you have other people further to the south who still call themselves Medjay, they still call them Irjet, they call themselves all these different divisions. But once you came to Kemet, you just became Kemet, which was just black people, right? I think that's basically what we have to get back to in terms of understanding that this is the global battle lines. We're all in it together. You see, once we can do that, now the behavior can be, all right, I'm going to support black people, as opposed to, oh, you got a bigger piece of the crumb than me. Yeah. And, people always have these justifications of like, oh, well, I expect the white people to do that, but my brother should do this and my brother should do that. And I'm like, it's so what got us enslaved. You see what I'm saying? Oh, these people did a golden stool and they're not supposed to have golden stools, so therefore I'm going to, conquer them and sell off the rest of the people to, the Europeans. That problematic thing at that time was the exact same problematic thing at this time. And I think that the only way to get above that or get beyond that is knowledge of self, knowledge of enemy, and then getting rid of all these contradictions and trying to be consistent, get yourselves together, and have behavior that's congruent with that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Kwaku. Jai. What's in the brief? Well, remember too. My son Kweku, anytime he cried as a very small baby, he always got whatever he wanted.
Yeah.
So you can see how that behavior translates into as he gets older. If you tell him to stop doing something, every single time he goes to tear up whatever's close to him, he'll knock down plates or whatever.
Yeah.
So now he has to unlearn the behavior of, I don't get everything that I want every single time that I want it. So much easier not to just give him everything he wanted every time.
Yeah.
But there's more in this equation than just me.
I'll jump straight into funding. Is the higher education institution, the universities, are they too materialistic? And I say that because of there's a general argument that funds are not being channeled into higher education. I don't know if you share that view. There's always that debate. Enough funds are not being channeled into higher education. But the question as well is, are the funds being channeled into the right sectors of education? The institutions, are they channeling the right funds into?
This goes back to what I was talking about before. Here at the Institute of African Studies, we have Yuri Lodge, which is, the lodge and also the restaurant associated with it. And the idea with that was for us to be able to be self-sufficient, where we produce our own cash so that whatever research we want to do, we can use it, use that in order to do it. I think that that's a brilliant idea. In terms of the implementation, I think it was less than brilliant because we went and got a gajillion-dollar loan, and now we have to pay back that loan. We're basically in this neo-colonial spiral ourselves. But I think just that idea of producing something that sustains ourselves as a goal, I think that's a solid one, and I think that if we can actually go towards that, then we would be in very good shape. And I think that should be not the loan part, but I think that should be a goal and a model of the university as a whole. So like if I'm talking about farmers market, if I'm talking about solar, so they can even sell it back to ECG. Like I remember in North Carolina, we went to this couple's house where they had wind power going and they had solar power going. They had so much energy that they sold it back to the grid. You see what I'm saying? If we had all of that land as a solar farm, if we had all of that land, we have this hill. If we had, windmills going around it, this is now you're using your scholarship in order to do something that's tangible and beneficial for the university and for the country and whatever. Once you do that, now you're not in a position of having your hands tied with the one who pays the piper calls the tune. And it's even to the point of like self-censorship of let's not deal with that. Like here we have funding for the Kwame Nkrumah Chair by Anglo Gold Ashanti. Well, what if we want to start talking about, asbestos and the effects of, mining on the river bodies, or if we want to talk about, these companies that are beating up, people who are trying to do galamsey or whatever. Like, people may not even venture into that. Now, Anglo Gold may not even say, we don't want you to talk about that. Yeah. But it's kind of thing, you know what, let's talk about the weather. Yeah. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Whereas opposed to if we had our own funding and weren't dependent on anyone, there's a proverb in Chi, who did he feed you as someone? Now we're not yet. Who did he feed you as someone? Now we're not yet. Translates to, if you are eating in 30 people's houses, then your mouth can't be hard, literally. But it's basically saying you can't say what you want to say because you have to eat at this person's house, that. So you compromise your stance, all the time. And I think this is basically the position that we're in now, especially with these so-called North-South partnerships. I like to see all of those just thrown out the window and look at South-South partnerships, not even South-South, Africa partnerships. So if it's Africans here and Africans in Zimbabwe, they have this, we have that, boom. Let's work with that. We have fruits, y'all have timber. All right, good, let's do that. And I remember, not remember like it was a long time ago, but last May I went to the AU for, it wasn't an AU conference, it just happened to be hosted there in Ethiopia. And as I walked into the building, I was struck by, I was looking at the fixtures and everything, and just struck by nothing in that building was African except for me. And what it made me think of is a talk by John Henrik Clarke where he said, imagine he was using Farrakhan as an example, being leader of the Nation of Islam. He was like, imagine if Farrakhan said, I will never ride in another limo until my people make a limo. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? Imagine if we took the AU took a stance that we will never be in an AU building until every single nut, bolt, door, piece of glass is manufactured by African people in Africa. Do you know how powerful that would be? Because even if you don't know how to do it now, it's like, okay, we better get on it. We better start, making doors. We better start making elevators. And that now becomes the impetus for your technological development. You see what I'm saying? But it's like, you can't say that you're going to climb a tree and you're digging a hole, right? What your actual behavior is the opposite of what you say that you want to do. You're saying, I want to go to the east bank of the river, and you start heading due west. You see what I'm saying? I think that this is where we find ourselves right now. So in terms of funding, we have to go towards being self-sufficient. And part of that is using our scholarship in order to do that. If we want to know how to do this, if we want to know how to do that. And I think that the relevance of things like African studies is that initially, I started off in engineering, and I switched away from engineering. But I see myself as, if I'm able to make 1,000 engineers have sense, now they're going to use their engineering in order to help African people, as opposed to what their default setting would be. Let me go and build up Europe. Let me go build up, America.
So basically, it's like translating theory into practice. That's really fun.
Translating theory into practice, and then even having an objective of being self-sufficient and not depending on your enemy. If you depend on your enemy, the oldest book in the world, The Instructions of Ptahhotep, is a very poignant line, which is, one who listens to his belly belongs to the enemy, right? So it's like, if you have these tastes and desires that are given to you by your enemy, whether it's for just cash, whether it's for this material stuff or whatever, then in order to satiate that thirst, that hunger for that stuff, you got to keep going to your enemy, right? But if you're not dependent on them, and I think that's one of the main things that was scary about the Black Panthers, not so much them walking around with guns, but all right, we're going to have our own feeding program, we're going to have our own schools, we're going to have this, that. I remember looking at a documentary on Central America, this group, Shining Path, and all they say is we want to be out from the government. We just want to grow our own food. We don't want to be part of the global economy. We just want to do our own thing, leave us alone. No. It's like Japan. We're kicking in the door. You're going to be part of this thing whether you like it or not. And I think that's the most scary thing, is people who are not beholden to their enemies. Then we can stand up and do whatever we want to do.
That's a good one, because it goes on, and we complain. There's a lot of wastage in the system. We complain we don't have money. Yet conservatively, if you take vehicles, our vice chancellors drive, and vice chancellors in 10 public universities, that amounts to about $2 million.
This is what I said to Prof. Alamako Ampufo. I said this. We need to. I say we, like, I'm gonna be in it, but I was like, then it needs to be a Thomas Sankara approach. Because he used to ride bicycles, to work. Even after they did the coup, they were trying to prove that he was corrupt. He found he had like 3 guitars, 2 bicycles, a broken refrigerator. Like, you see what I'm saying? He said no to all of these Benzes that y'all got. Y'all are getting the smallest car, whatever. And I think that even now we have a better option than that, which is we can say everybody here drives Kantanka, right? All of the phones are going to be African phones. All of the laptops are going to be African laptops. If we can have, and she was like, "Oh, let me ride in the, what did you say? Let me ride in the 4x4 small." Because I'm like, that's the way to do it. You see what I'm saying? Just exactly what you're saying. If you cut out all that crap, but again, this comes back to knowledge of self, knowledge of enemy, and behavioral correlates, right? That if you know yourself and you know that my enemy, I gave a talk on Founders Day at Commonwealth Hall, and the example, this is dealing with cars. The example that I gave to illustrate the point I was making was that the head of France drives a French car, head of Italy drives an Italian car, head of Britain drives a British car, head of Germany drives a German car, head of this, Korea drives a Korean car, head of China drives a Chinese car, head of Japan drives a Japanese. Now, when I was talking to one of my students, actually in Intro to African Studies, he was like, "Oh, but European stuff is just better." I was like, nobody goes with what's better. They say what's mine. No one is objective about the head of America drives a Cadillac, an American car. You see what I'm saying? No one is saying what's the best thing objectively. Let me go and get that. You see what I'm saying? They're like, what do we produce? That's what we're going to do. And that made it more tangible for them, that they can actually see that this is what intelligent people do. Now, you who aren't intelligent, and then you just say, let me go get the bins and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, this is stupid. When I was talking to another colleague of mine, he was like, I never thought about it like that. He's a PhD holder, but there's a difference between like having information dumped in you and being smart. These are not the same thing. Again, too much schooling, too little education. That if you know yourself, if you know your enemy, then ideally the behavior would follow from that I'm not going to go enrich the Japanese. I'm not going to go enrich the Germans. Look at the Holocaust that they did here in Africa. I'm not going to go enrich the Dutch. I don't want Dutch wax prints. You see what I'm saying? All of that will start taking place once you know who you are and who your enemy is.
Thanks. Thank you very much. But do you think the higher education institutions are accountable enough to society?
No,
They're not.
no.
Why do you say
They're
that?
accountable to who pays them.
Yeah.
The one who pays the piper calls the tune, and they get their payment from pipers from elsewhere. They're
Mhm.
north-south
Mhm.
partnerships, so-called, where this hand is up and this hand is down. And yeah, so
Yeah.
how are you going to be accountable to someone who isn't, whatever? But I think that if you become self-sufficient, sovereign, then you can start being accountable to your own people. It's not, again, it's like how Europe underdeveloped Africa. When you look at whatever they built here, is Walter Rodney's basic thesis that if they're building a road, it's a road from the mine to the port. Now you may walk on the road and say, oh, look at this nice thing that they did for us. It wasn't for you.
Yeah.
And it's like the government structures. It's like the government structures were there initially so that they can do just that. They can take out all of the resources without having to answer to anyone, right? Now, as opposed to questioning Parliament and this, that, and the third, you just took out the white faces and put in the black faces. But it's like this is a refrigerator supposed to keep things cool, right? Imagine I took out the white part and I put in the black part and it still does the exact same thing, as opposed to questioning the whole thing fundamentally,
Yeah, the structure.
right? I'm trying to warm up my food, and I'm using a system that's designed to keep it cool. You see what I'm saying? I took out the white piece, I put in the black piece, but it's still doing that. So I think that you have to question, not just question. This is again where African studies comes in, is that you can't choose options that you've never even heard of. And how many Africans in Ghana have ever read Mbongi about the Kikongo governance system? Zero. How many, have ever read about this? I can just start listing examples that no one has ever even heard of. So how are you going to select something that you don't even know about?
Yeah.
You know about this is what they do in my ethnic group, and this is what they do in Britain and America. That's all you know. You see what I'm saying? But once you actually know something else throughout the African world, whether it's on the continent or elsewhere, then you can start saying, oh, look at how they did this revolution in Mekamui, so-called Bougainville. That's, they use coconut oil to do it. We got coconuts. We can use coconut oil to fuel our vehicles.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? If you've never even heard of that, how can you select it? You can select petrol or diesel,
Yeah.
and that's all you select from.
Yeah.
But these people won a war by making their own coconut oil to fuel the stuff that they, got. That's around your side of town as well. You see what I'm saying? So this is what I think the role of African studies is in terms of being relevant. Look at all these examples of what we did. Look at all these patterns of when we were victorious. Let's do this, let's do that, let's do that. As opposed to being horses with blinders on. We see here, we look down there. Finish.
Okay. What would you say is accounting for the increasing cost of higher education as well?
When I first came in 2009, they thought I was a Ghanaian student. So they charged me 500 Ghana cedis. Excuse me. Once they saw my passport, they raised it up to $4,000, which, for people who I guess live somewhere other than Ghana would be like, oh, that's not much.
Yeah.
But if you're paying it out of your own pocket, I've never paid for school myself because I was always on academic scholarships or whatever. But the 500 Ghana cedis that was there in 2009 was very unsustainable, I'm sure. There are several factors, and I'll deal with these, in turn. One, as faculty, we don't get paid enough, for my standards. A colleague of mine who's also from the U.S. was working at Ashesi, and she did a article saying that as a professor at Ashesi, she got less. No, her salary was equal to a McDonald's worker. A fast food, you could go to a fast food joint, and if she was manager, then she would just even be blowing that out of the window. There are several things that go into the funding
not being enough, and one way of trying to offset that is by passing that cost on to students. And since they've raised all the fees, like about a year or two ago, I've actually seen changes on the campus, so you can at least say, okay, well, maybe they're using it for something other than just the 4x4s that they're riding around, but I think mainly they're using it for the 4x4. But, I think, again, that it would be possible to keep the fees down if we were doing things that are more intelligent, like some of the suggestions that I've already given during the course. I think that because they're running a model that's not sustainable and not meant to be sustainable, now they're trying to find ways to plug up holes in a basket. You see what I'm saying? Oh, let's pass it to the students. Let's go to the north and get more north-south partnerships. Let's go beg these folks. Let's go beg those folks. Whereas you wouldn't have to beg if you were doing things. Right. And, I think really this has to be part of, they have the thing about the vision of like going as a world-class university. And I think that, to some degree it's whatever. To a large degree it's like, looking at something that is extremely flawed as an ideal to be aspired to, right? So as opposed to saying, let's be like white people, let's be like Eurasians, we need to be like, how can we do something that's going to get us free? Free not in the sense of we do whatever we want, but free in the sense that no one can tell us what to do because we do all of it for ourselves. So freedom actually in the end analysis means much more work than being, enslaved, because then you got somebody taking care of you, quote unquote. So just in short, I think it requires a different vision, because you can't say, I'm going to Kumasi, so you start walking towards Takoradi. How are you going to end up in Kumasi and you're taking the wrong road?
End up in Ivory Coast.
Yeah, you see? I thought I was going to. I'm like, you're not even on the right path. So you have to first change your vision to say, how are we going to have total African liberation from under, white world terror domination, from under these Eurasians. Once you can do that, now you can start doing, all right, let's wean ourselves off of this Eurasian technology and make it ourselves. You see? Let's wean ourselves off of their funds, which are readily available, and produce our own funds.
Anyway, you mentioned earlier as well that the Institute of African Studies has really large and as a means of generating funds. And
in the future, that would be what it would do.
Yeah.
If it ever gets past the debt that it owes.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And the university itself has its own guest house, but I doubt if it's even making profits. But what are the other means through which we can, you've mentioned a lot anyway within the discussion.
Right, innovative ideas about how to do that.
And so what are the other? Do you have any other means through which you think we can raise funds apart from all what you've said?
Yeah, I think that there are lots of things that can be done within the university as a campus, and then that the university can spearhead. I think going more towards. I have a friend who's in the Caribbean. He was talking about this deep water electricity turbines that they're working on. I want to say University of West Indies or something like that. I think that's exactly what it was. But anyway, he was talking about they have these turbines they put in the deep ocean, and in the process of going down there, it churns them, and that's what creates this electricity. And then one of the byproducts of that process is clean water. And I was like, this makes just so much sense. Now that would require a lot of technical know-how, it would require a lot of other things. But again, you would have, and I think that this is what African Studies is for, is to, give people a vision of how to be sensible. Once, it's like, it should be the head and heart of what everything else is doing. So you could do science, but if you don't have any sense, you're going to make bombs that only selectively destroy African people. You see what I'm saying? Okay, this is how all the buildings will remain, but all the black people will be vaporized instantaneously. It'll leave the white people, though. You see what I'm saying?
now you can do all the science in the world, but if you don't have the sense to say this is who you are, this is who your enemies are, and this is how you should behave. So I think that, if we could leverage some type of technology like that, reverse engineer it so that we can, look at the Chinese. They reverse engineered everything. They used to make jokes back in the 80s about the Chinese come over with their cameras, clicky, they take a train, clicky. But now you see they're making their trains. They're doing this. So, I think that, I can give different ideas, but things like that are sustainable. And I also think that ideas like that, when we're talking about solar, when we're talking about water, things like that are much in line with an African worldview, not only in the sense of sustainability, but in terms of our reverence for the elements, whether it's the sun, whether it's the rivers. At one point in time when we were so-called uneducated, quote unquote, we had all of our rivers in pristine condition. We had all of these trees that have been here for 500 years growing. Now, so-called educated, you don't believe in reincarnation, so let me just use it all up during my lifetime, and, I'm good. So, I think that if we can look towards technologies that are more in alignment with our worldview as African people, one, it leaves something for subsequent generations. It leaves something for ourselves when we come back. Another one that is also something that helps us to be self-sufficient, as we talked about before. Other ones that it ties into our indigenous worldview. When we're talking about Radio Heru, that's the sun. All these people are Christian. They don't understand that all of that is just allegory for Heru, the sun, right? If they knew that, I would even like to see a solar company called Heru Solar. You see what I'm saying? That's bringing back the ancient and bringing it with, this more modern thing, and then let's create it ourselves. You see what I'm saying? If we can do any of those types of things in the area of energy, in the area of food, in the area of clothing, in the area of shelter. Like right now I'm working with a architect, a brother who's an architect, because I want to do indigenous earth building. Now this is all the rage all over the world except in Africa, right? Yeah. So I was looking at a documentary called First Earth, and they go all throughout the world. First they come to Africa and show earth houses in the places that haven't got rid of them yet. Yeah. And then they go to the U.S., they show adobe brick building, things that have been standing since 1620, whatever. Then they go to the U.K., they show like a pub made out of earth, cob architecture. U.S., Canada, they go to Yemen, they show these skyscrapers where the walls are a meter thick, and it's a skyscraper. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And there's no iron rod in there, there's no Dangote cement in there, it's just all mud. Now you got plenty of mud, just look left and right, but you're not willing to use it because that means I'm poor, that means I'm savage, that means I'm heathen. That's your entire orientation is towards Takoradi, and you're supposed to be going towards Kumasi. You see what I'm saying? So if you become sensible, now you can say, all right, we have these stones here. Here's a whole escarpment that's nothing but stone. We can build in stone. We used to do that. You see what I'm saying? We have all these temples made out of solid stone. We just carved it into the mountain. We did this. Once you know it, now you can say, well, let's do that. And I think that here's the thing I used to always say, inspiration is showing people possibilities, right? So if you are able to show them you've done this in the past, you can do this again. You know what? They may not do it, but at least you know now.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. Next about the challenges. I mean, you've mentioned lots. I mean, and it's all revolves around the fact that we don't know who we are. Mm-hmm. We're not thought of our enemies. Mm-hmm. We don't know where we're going. Mm-hmm. You know, there's this,
and we don't know that our behavior should be consistent with that. So we're like, oh yes. I was looking at another article because I'm steady researching because I'm trying to do my house, using mud bricks or just a straight cob. So I met with a builder up at Bampon last week, and the architect, and he's down. He's like, yeah, let's do it. Let's raise up our thing. Let's show that it can be done. He's like hype. He's hype as me. But yeah, when we're talking about how to make these happen, I was talking about, there was an article by architects saying that locally made, local materials are more sustainable and they're better. But I bet if you go to the architect's house, it's going to be sandcrete blocks and roofing sheets. So there has to be a thing of you have to be consistent. the hypocrisy, the contradictions, or whatever. It should burn people up to be hypocritical. It'd be like, how can I get out of that hypocritical thing? But that has to be instilled right from the jump. If not, then you end up with people who have all the consciousness here, but you don't see it in any aspect of their lives.
It's interesting. The thing you said about the reverse and being uneducated, quote unquote, and everything being the same for University of Ghana. I remember when I was here, I was doing my masters at the time, and
when was this?
I started my masters in 2009. I finished in 2011.
We were here at the same time.
Yeah, I graduated in 2012.
In what area?
Adult education.
Okay.
Yeah. So you always find the estate guys pruning the trees on campus, and they use chainsaw.
Yeah.
I always ask myself, how can you prune a tree with a chainsaw? You keep cutting trees and go to town to sell them, and no one says anything. And this is the university.
Yeah.
It was so intriguing for me. I was like, my final set of questions. It's a question actually. With this current state, all the things going on, what are the future possibilities of possible futures of higher education in Ghana? With the current situation we have and everything going on, what are the possible futures?
Okay. So look at possible worlds, possible dimensions. We can keep going on the trajectory that we're in, which is towards doom, gloom, and destruction. Or we can say, all right, if we say that we're going to, I think, again, it comes back to what our aims and objectives are, what are our tastes and desires, what are our wants. If we say we want to be slaves, then we will keep going towards the path of further enslavement. If, however, we say we want to be free, then we'll change that trajectory. And I think this is a thing, and oftentimes when people talk about African studies, and matter of fact, the same brother, the architect, who's working with me on this project, he was like, do you think we can go back to what we were doing back then? And I was like, I don't think that that's even what we're talking about. Again, to use the metaphor in Aikweama's 2000 Seasons, he was talking about stream water flowing towards the desert. It wants to be so giving and so generous, not knowing that that is destruction, that our way is reciprocity. That means that you give in Sakon and Saba, the hand goes, the hand comes. That's our way. It's not giving senselessly to something that only knows destruction and to take. So this is stream water just flowing towards the desert. I think that it's a misconception to think we're talking about turning the stream back and putting it back on the mountain. That will happen eventually through evaporation and precipitation and whatever. I think what we're talking about is channeling that stream water away from the desert and towards irrigable land where we can have some benefit from it. You see what I'm saying? What we're doing right now is we're going towards the wrong direction. You can't say, I want to climb the tree, and you start digging a hole. That's inappropriate behavior, to use Claude Anderson's terminology. What we're talking about is, all right, shift it. That's what we used to do in Kemet, right? We used to have, use the Nile to irrigate here, irrigate there, boom. That's what a sensible person would do, and I think that that's really what we have to be talking about. But before you do that, you have to even have the idea that this is a goal. One thing that cuts us off at the past is not knowing about ourselves, because that means we've never done anything before. So how can we do anything now? Our only accomplishment is the degree to which we can approximate Eurasians. You see what I'm saying? The degree to which we can cite Greek tragedies and Shakespeare and all this insanity. Like, I got colleagues here who just bubble trolling. I'm like, what is this? What are you talking about? I don't even know this. And here you are, a continental African from some village somewhere, and you citing Shakespeare. What type of insanity is that? So yeah, once you know that you've done something before, that's what you have been told, then you will start to think better of yourself, and you'll start questioning, well, why do I have to be under the boot of somebody who just crawled out of a cave like just a couple hundred years ago? Why am I doing that? You'll think better of yourself. I did these great things, I can do it again. You'll know more about yourself, and then you'll start to do for yourself. So again, at some point, one trajectory, a possible trajectory, would be finally making something like an educational system, which doesn't exist yet. This trajectory would just be continuing with the schooling system that's designed to do exactly what it's doing. You know, when you talk about it's not accountable, it's, you know, separate from society, it's not doing this and that. That's what it's designed to do. You know, and I gave a talk. I hadn't heard of this sister before, Dambisa Moyo. She has this thing. She gave a talk why aid to Africa doesn't work, right? And she has a book about aid as well. And I was like, I was almost, you know, perplexed. I was like, what do you mean it doesn't work? It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. What do you mean it doesn't work? And I was like, that's so, like, even right now, it's like my brain is like burning. Like, what are you saying? It's like, oh, this gun shot someone. Why isn't the gun working? I'm like, no, the gun is working. Oh, this knife cut someone. Why isn't the knife working? This knife is broken. It's cutting people. I'm like, what do you think? Right. So this higher schooling system, I wouldn't even want to call it higher education, is doing what it was originally set up to do. That's the trajectory it was set on, and it's still doing that thing, right? So it's working, not working in our best interest, but it's working in the sense of it's doing what it was set up to do. Or, you know, again, we can
change, alter things.
Yeah. Irrigable land or desert is our choice.
Thank you very much,
No
Dr.
problem.
Obadele Kambon.
No problem.
I mean, I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of things to write and then analyze. And
Yeah,
transcribe.
I know you're probably like, dang,
Yeah.
I'm going to have to transcribe for like a year.
Yeah, that's good. I mean,
There's I looked online. I actually had a talk that I gave way back in like 04 or something for ASCAC. And there's a website that when you upload the MP3, it'll automatically, it's basically like speech to text technology. So it'll automatically spit out the transcription. Of course, it's not perfect, so you'll see like every 20 sentences, oh, that's wrong. But that may be that'll probably help for this and other interviews that you get. Just do like a search for, you know, MP3 to text or something like that.
See, I tried to do the hard way. Listen to it.
Yeah, that is definitely the hard way. We're actually, myself and a couple others have been talking about trying to work on speech to text and text to speech, and there are some companies out there, Fraunhofer, Voxygen, others have been trying to break into the African arena and you know, get some of those things going, because that's one thing that I use a lot. You know, both I'll write a paper just by talking to the phone and say it, or like I'll read a 300-page book in like a day because I have Acrobat. And it just reads the whole thing to me, so I'll just be sitting there with my eyes open. Or I'll be cooking and I'll be like page 200. So it makes it much easier.
It's much easier, that's true.
So you don't have to torture yourself.
Yeah. There's this guy who's doing architecture in school at the University of Auckland, and he's doing something with tropical architecture.
Okay.
I'm sure he'd like to, you know, contact you as well. And I've been here before.
Is he African?
He's Ghanaian.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
I'll
he's a
be willing
Ghanaian
to
guy.
work with him.
He's doing something with tropical architecture because he thinks look, what we're doing is wrong and it has to change, and it's that thing that's going on here. Yeah, but it's the world, you know. It's gaining prominence in the world now. The prominent architects in Africa are the ones who are doing tropical architecture and stuff. And, you know, so I'm sure he would want to get in touch. I'll give him your email.
No problem. I would love that.
Maybe we'll get him some.
Maybe he can use me as a case study because we're building. Start building very soon.
Yeah. He's going to come down, I think, sometime next year.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to it. Like I said, my colleague, she gave her seminar presentation. She was like, even the people who had a positive view towards earth building, they're like, oh, it lets us know who we are, and it shows that we're the indigenous because we have all these new developments show that they're just strangers. But then when she asked, you know, even the people who had pride in it, then she asked, okay, in the future, what do you want to build or what do you want your child? All of them were like, we want Sandcrete. And again, this is the backwards paradigm. I only know my village. I only know that. They don't see. And I was saying that as researchers, we should inform them about it. I went to this thing at Ghana Institute of Architects in Accra, you know, near Accra Central, around Ridge somewhere. And
there were all these architects who were showing their designs. One was this place, Aqua Safari. They're using thatch and wood, and they're using, mud and stone and all this. And this is the most posh thing there. So the people in Tamale think posh is, all right, I got a sandcrete thing and I got aluminum sheets on it. That's all they know.
Yeah.
So if they're thinking we're moving on up, so they're like, here is the most poor people. These are the rich people. But if they know that there are even people who are richer than all of that, who are doing stuff that actually makes sense. Because who's going to fly, 2,000 miles to go stay in a place that's like where they just left? They were trying to get away from that and trying to see something different. They're coming here.
To the same thing. Yeah.
Right. And, I have another colleague. He's out of Florida. Brother, he went to FAMU. And he is working on different earth bag buildings and other things like that. So I'm like, it should be our role as researchers, because they're not getting it in KG, they're not getting it in primary, they're not getting it in creche, they definitely ain't getting it in creche. They're not getting it in, SHS, they're not getting it in university. When would they ever learn about what other African people are doing, what are the ideas of other African people? What are they doing in Tanzania? How did they solve this problem? You see, if we have the combined brain power of our entire African family throughout the entire world, that's much better than the brain power of my teeny tiny village. And this is why, I often call myself an African anti-American. And people say, oh, why is that? I said, because I'm intelligent. You don't have to be anti-American. Yes, I do. Because when you look at America or any of those things, it's really like pan-Europeanism. You see what I'm saying? It's like they got streets named after Germans, they got places named after France, they got, English language, they got Latin in it, they got all this stuff in it. It's like a combination of all these Eurasians put together, and that's what they did at the Berlin Conference to colonize. That's what they did during enslavement to make that happen. They said, we're all against all of y'all. So now you put every single Eurasian on the face of the planet against your teeny tiny village. What do you expect to happen? But if you know that you're broader than that, now you can bring every African to bear. Those Africans from Jamaica who are brought here to, first Christianized to make them think we're saved and y'all are heathens. Now we're going to be, you see what I'm saying? If you all in Jamaica and you all here know that we're on the same side, we're trying to protect our gene pool. You see what I'm saying? We're trying to make sure our descendants will even exist. Now we can have a different narrative.
That's a big work.
Yeah. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be done. And somehow I have hope for the future. I think that and as much as we still have the younger generation who will say, oh, yes, I know the sport work. There's this other generation that thinks, look, it has to be done the right way. Yeah. So it looks bleak, but...
When did you start learning about Ivan Van Sertima and some of these other Serpent Joke?
Just about 2-3 years ago.
When you left?
Nah, I started from here. I started doing my proposal and everything from here.
Okay.
So I started looking out from. I started with Molefia Santi.
Okay.
Yes, because he edited the
book. He was just here,
Yeah, he was here in June.
Yeah,
I wasn't here. Yeah. And there's
Afrocentricity or the Afrocentric
idea and stuff. And actually came from George Day. On this anti-colonial theory and anti-colonialism and the African diaspora stuff. Okay. Then I started reading about Molefia Santi. I was like, okay, who's this guy? So the link started there. I started Henry Clark, Benjo Conan, and I saw the pictures in your office, and I'm like, oh, okay, how come these people are around there?
I actually met both of them.
Oh, okay.
At different points in time. But
they all died this year, one died this year. Yeah, they all died this year, I think. So I start asking myself, all these things are there. You claim you have a master's degree, you never thought most of these things. Yeah. So it's like self-education.
Yeah. And never let school get in the way of your education.
Because I always had the questions, and then sometimes you couldn't find the answers. Yeah. But I started reading these people, and you start, getting a deeper understanding of what it is, like Walter Rodney and stuff, and the dangers they face as well, like how Rodney was killed. But
this is, I think, a major thing, and that's why I was asking, did you get that from going outside? And that's related, you were starting to think outside.
is that not just here, but in general, like we homeschool my daughter, so we have all these different documentaries about animals and wildlife and things from all over the world. And one of the documentaries was on wildebeest, and they cross the Serengeti plains. They go, this navigation system, and they do an interesting thing when they arrive at a river, and it's that there are, these crocodiles in the river, which is very dangerous. But they all come to the edge of the river, and then they stand there. They look left, look right. Then eventually one gets the courage and hops out. Now everybody goes on. Now most of them die from trampling on each other, and it's not a very neat procession. It's what they call herd mentality, right? So everybody is like, as long as we can stay close, we can stay together, we're not going to be picked off, because usually the crocodiles will go for the small one that's on the edge, whatever. So there's a proverb in Yoruba, which is to say that there's a bit of wisdom inside of foolishness. There's a bit of foolishness inside of wisdom. So in a sense, it's stupid for them to be crashing on top of each other and killing. The majority of them die from each other, drowning, stomping on each other. Now they're trying to get to a point, and if they get to a point where the bank isn't on the other side, is more like a cliff and they can't scale it, you have thousands and thousands and thousands die, because the ones that are on that side, they're still going with the herd. They're still going, and those ones don't have any place to go, so they either drown, they get crushed, whatever. So I see that as a metaphor for what we have here in Ghana, right? People don't want to be at the edge, because the one at the edge, there's a proverb in Chi, Akoko Jinhonjaya, Akroma Chinari. It's, if a chicken goes off by itself, the hawk will come and capture it. So it's stupid in one sense for everybody to just cluster together and do something that's not necessarily intelligent, like going towards Christianity, or let's all do Sound Creek houses. Let's all do, everybody's doing the exact same thing. But there's a little bit of wisdom inside of it. You can see at least the thinking behind it. We don't want to get whatever. But then it's stupid to be by yourself in one sense. Yeah. But in another sense, that's how you can come to a level of consciousness. That's how Kwame Nkrumah can come to a level of consciousness, and all this first generation of folks who have more sense than, the average bear, because they say, okay, I don't have to do what everybody's doing because it doesn't really make sense. And I think that's one thing, like for myself as an African out of the diaspora, I really don't have to worry about what people, I do things that I think are intelligent to do. And I don't really have to worry about what people are going to say. Now, most Ghanaians can't do this. I had a colleague who was here. He was like, I wish I could wear clothes like that and wear my hair like that. But one time I went up to the top VC's office, and they told me, go back home when you've cut your hair. He said they give you leeway that they won't give me. You see what I'm saying? So, and I really appreciate that, because I don't have to worry about what people will say, because at the end of the day, I'm like, you all are worshiping an imaginary white man. You're worshiping Caesar Borgia. Why do I care what you think? Why do I care what you think about what I'm saying when you're doing something that is insane? You see what I'm saying? And that, you get a level of freedom. That's why, like, in a lot of the literary epics, whether it's Sunjata or whatever, there's the idea of the hero who leaves his place of origin and goes on this fantastic adventure, and then eventually, comes back full circle, and he's been changed. He's transformed every place that he's gone, but he himself has come back, transformed. And I think that that's part of what makes that so compelling and people relate to, is that that's actually what happens. You don't have to worry about, when I was young, I was always fat and slow. Like, the people here don't know that. Yeah. So you can really become who you are. You can live up to your potential, and now when you come back, you don't have to be weighed down by those. They have what they call in education self-fulfilling prophecy, where you just keep doing what you've always been doing.
So I'll be in touch.
Okay. Yeah. And how do I get a copy? Is this two? Are these both going at the same time?
Which ones?
Are these both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just in case. So
yeah, that's smart.
Yeah. I can send a soft copy and.